Representing Franchise Secrets, Erik Von Horn.
If you're not a part of the Franchise Secrets Facebook group, what are you waiting for? It's franchisesecrets.com/Facebook. I cannot believe how valuable this group turned out to be. When someone asks a question, the feedback is honest, authentic, very helpful, and it's from multiple perspectives. If you're not sure that you're getting the most accurate information about franchising, then check out the largest, most helpful Facebook group in all of franchising. Whether you're a Z, a Zor, a buyer, or investor, join our free Facebook group at franchisesecrets.com/Facebook. Welcome to the Franchise Secrets Podcast. Your host, Erik Van Horn, here today with Gary De Jesus. Gary's been a friend for a while, branding genius. He spent 35 years in branding, marketing, in franchising, consumer products, and fashion retail. He's been in franchising for the last 7 years. Prior to franchise marketing and brand development, he was 18 years with Procter & Gamble, P&G, amazing company, developing new brands for them and reinvigorating established brands. He has his MBA from NYU Stern School of Business, and his undergrad is from this little university called Harvard. So, Gary, you are one of the best in the world at branding. And I wanted to have you come in here to talk about that in relation to franchisors and franchisees. So welcome, buddy.
Well, but it's long time. It's been a little bit since we've chatted. Missed obviously a lot of the chats that we've had. We've had a lot of good ones.
We have, and you've helped me with some branding stuff, and we've gone through exercise. Like, I've known about what you've done. I've seen it at arm's length, and then we got to dive into that with one of the brands that I was working on, and that was really fun to kind of be on the inside of it. So, what do most people think? Well, let's start out with, what did I miss? What are some of the things that you want to talk about in your bio or your background before I just start jumping in with a bunch of questions?
Well, it's kind of funny. There are certain things that when you think about the principles of a lot of things that I go off and do and can go off and do, it does transcend a variety of different markets. One of my fun bucket list items was the development of FC Cincinnati, an MLS soccer club. And so using the same principles that I use for developing brands, whether they be consumer products or franchise or so on, I use the same thing to develop a professional sports organization. So, the ability to go off and develop a brand can go across so many different things. But again, developing a sports organization was kind of fun. It was definitely one of those bucket list items that, I can honestly say that I developed an MLS sports franchise.
That's awesome. I don't even think I even knew that. So there's a lot about you that I probably don't know. Let's start here. Where do most brands, franchise brands, miss or underappreciate branding? What do they miss in branding or underappreciate until it's too late?
So, wow, that's a big question. So let me break it down into a couple of pieces. I think when people think about branding, many times they start with some kind of logo representation of who they are, but they miss on really understanding what the story is behind it and understanding truly who they are. So a lot of things from a standpoint of whether it be logo design or image creation or even website doesn't really focus in on understanding who the brand is, what the value the brand brings to its customer base. So they miss from the very beginning. When I usually work with brands to develop them, we start with understanding the brand's purpose, right? So before we get into any kind of visual expression of the brand, we have to understand why the brand exists and what's the value it creates, and really diving down into it and understanding the psychology of how it truly motivates or influences people. And so that's where it starts. I think the other component is when you start to think about brand development, I think that when you talk to many individuals, they'll think of marketing more as kind of snazzy little, cute little gadgets and gizmos and promotions and so on, as opposed to how do you truly want the brand to be appreciated by consumers? What do you want the perception of your brand to be? When somebody thinks about your brand, what do you want them to think about? What's in their heart? What's in their mind when they think about your brand? So too much time, energy, and effort is spent many times on what I call gizmos and gadgets and the newest technology out there, or the newest, promotion out there. And then not enough in really establishing the core values of the brand. And I think the last thing when we think about it is that for me, I don't use the term branding very often. And forgive me, Eric, I don't know if this is a completely G-rated program. However, for me, branding is what you do to a cow's ass to let everybody know that you own the cow, right? And so it's simply leaving your mark in different places. And too many people think about branding as let's leave our mark in different places, as opposed to brand development really is about how do you develop the brand's perception in everybody's mind so that people are going to take an action the way you want them to take an action, whether it be a purchase, whether it be to understand or an inquiry or so on. So I break it down into too many times we're focusing in on let's get to a pretty logo before we understand what this brand really is about. I think too many times brands focus in on marketing kitschy items as opposed to truly developing what the brand's about and communicating it, and then choosing the right platforms to do such. And then again, really focusing in how can I get my brand out there as opposed to what does my brand really mean?
Perfect. Why do some founders, not all founders out there, why do some founders underappreciate the time and effort that it takes to create a really good brand?
So I think you and I, we talk about this and we have mentioned this in the past. And I think we even mentioned just before where for some reason, it's like marketing and branding for some reasons, people perceive it as like being able to paint in your house. I can paint my house. I can paint, anybody can paint, right? But at the end of the day, it comes down to, do you want somebody who truly understands all the principles and the foundational elements of going off and do this? That takes time. Or, you know what, you believe that you're a marketer at heart, and so therefore you're just going to do it and make it faster. And so I think that's a key issue, if you will, in the industry. Everybody thinks they're a marketer. Everybody thinks they're a brand developer. And so they just kind of oversimplify the process and therefore just think that it should happen overnight.
So let's think about some companies out there that have a good brand and some that don't have very good branding or a good brand. Let's name some names and tell me what you like or don't like about them.
So some of my favorite brands, do you want to stay in the franchise space or do you want to go just in general?
We'll go in general.
Okay.
Oh yeah,
So,
you can go, actually, you know what, for this, you can go in the franchise space because we like franchises.
okay.
But when we go into poor brands, let's talk about in or outside of the franchising space.
So, okay. So when we talk about good brands within the franchise space, I think that a brand like Cycle Bar did a great job. Now, granted, I'm a little bit, biased as I developed Cycle Bar and those propositions, but Cycle Bar understood what it was about. Cycle Bar understood what it was about and how it separated itself from a soul cycle, from a flywheel, and so on. And so from the very beginning, it was a brand that had a purpose and also attached itself to other cause-related opportunities. So it was, the brand made itself much bigger than what the functional element is. And to be honest, that's what it really comes down to. When I think of really strong brands, I think of brands doing more than what this brand functionally says it does. I don't think of Apple as being a computer. I don't think of it that way at all. In fact, when you think of Apple, I think of an Apple as being a way to simply and intuitively create. Right. And so it's bigger than simple computing. Apple is one of the greatest brands in the world. Obviously, people know, and you can tell by its market cap and so on. So you look at brands like that, Cycle Bar, the intent of Cycle Bar was to do the same thing. It was not about how do I get people on a bicycle? It was about how do I create an energized community of folks who want to go and just exercise together. And so it was kind of, we jokingly called it a party on a bike, right? How do we play from that standpoint? So that brand I call out from that standpoint. And I really enjoyed a lot of those components.
So with that, before we get into a poor brand, is a party on a bike. Does that go into a tagline somewhere, or is that internally how everybody knows that brand and how you want that brand to be perceived from a consumer standpoint, even though it may not be explicitly said that way?
So the tagline for Cycle Bar was "Rock Your Ride," right? With the whole component of obviously being able to apply music into the ride scenario so that you really enjoyed the experience you're in there. And then there were sights and sounds and so on that were applied to it. So the party on the bike was more of an internal component. We wanted to make exercise fun. We didn't want to make exercise that component where people just absolutely hated it. We also wanted it to be diverse so that you don't come into the same thing over and over and over again, which we know from an indoor cycling standpoint, it's basically a bike. So with music changes, the instructors have different perspectives and so on. So party on a bike was internal, Rock Your Ride was the external point of view. And the party on a bike helped us to go off and communicate to the franchisees the amount of fun we literally wanted them to have. And we would work to create, whether it be Tequila Tuesdays or things like that, and fun things from that standpoint, or community events for them to go off and engage and enjoy. It became, again, bigger than the actual physical ride itself. It became more about fun in the community.
So let's talk about some poor examples of branding.
Wow.
Or it might even be a brand that you've done a refresh on or something like that. And you don't have to name names, or you can name names, or you can be inside or outside of the franchising world. I just wanted to open it up and let you go where you want to go with this.
So I'm probably not going to name names because, not everybody wants their baby to be called ugly. And that's, a little bit tough to go off and do and to get people to appreciate that. So what I would tell you is that a brand that I looked at, and I actually looked at it very closely and realized that the brand was never going to be bigger than what it was. In fact, what it basically was, it was a brand that had such a functional name that it could only be that. It couldn't stand outside of itself, right? It could only focus in on the hearts and minds of consumers on that one specific element. And because of such, from a franchise standpoint, growth was limited, right? You can't expand services outside of that component because ultimately it goes away from the name. It was a painting franchise, honestly, and they had painting in the name. And so they wanted to go off and they did so many other things besides painting, but it didn't make sense per se with the name that it traveled. So you have to look at it and you have to say whether or not the name is flexible enough for expansion, right? Because too many times what we typically have is very, very, very specific names, but you have to look at longer term expansion, because a brand that has a high level of specificity, they may actually wind up going out of business over a period of time because that may not be important, or the proliferation of other brands that do something similar, because what they're doing is something that others can do, make the ability for it to flex, change, adopt, react more difficult. So when I look at poor brands, I look at poor brands that have a highly functional name, that are very specific to one particular activity, and as a result of such, their ability to grow is going to be highly limited. Does that make sense?
It makes 100% sense. And I know the brand that you're talking about, and fantastic founder, and very appreciative of how you helped them with their brand. So I 100% know who you're talking about. But that brings up a kind of a question. Like, what comes first? The name, the logo, the tagline, the website, or website domain. What comes first? Or what are the most common mistakes made with entrepreneurs before it's a bigger brand as a franchise? So common mistakes, or what comes first? You pick.
Let's talk about what comes first. And I'll share this as far as the story. I remember at the time when I was brought on to create all the elements of Cycle Bar, sitting down with the founder and him looking at me and saying, don't you love the name? I was like, yeah, it's fine. Who cares? Okay. And he kept on saying, why don't you love the name? I said, it's fine. Who cares? And he looked at me a little bit, bothered by me not being as excited about the name as he was. And I looked at him and said, do you like the name Dawn? Do you like the name Tide? It doesn't matter. It's what you put into the name that's the most relevant component, right? So Pringles, all right, who cares? Those are all great names only because all the activity behind it made them great names. Cycle Bar, could it have been? Yeah, sure. But only until you understood and we created what was Cycle Bar about. What was it going to deliver? How do we deliver it across all the mechanisms and so on? So you ask what comes first. I care less about the name first. I care more about the reason why the brand exists and what the special focus or the value that this brand is going to deliver. So for me, I always start with what's the purpose of the brand, particularly understanding against the target segment or target audiences that this brand wants to deliver against. Once we do that and we understand its purpose and we start to understand key points of differentiation and how it, and what the benefit is and all this wonderful stuff strategically, then we can say the name, right? Does the name make sense based on what the founder described? Does the name make sense? Now, naming as a convention is not very easy. The reason being is that there are so many people that have so many different names and sitting on so many different names that sometimes the trademark process can take a significant amount of time. So you either have to make the decision after you understand the purpose of the brand or why the brand exists and what the value it delivers. Does the name that is currently in the founder's head deliver against that? Can it deliver against that? There may be better choices, but going through the trademark process and all the elements of going off and doing that can be such a nightmare that sometimes the best thing to go off and do is saying, if you have a decent brand name or a brand name you can work with, let's go with that. Then we start to look at it from a standpoint of the mark. And the mark has to have a couple of different pieces to it.
So when we're talking about the mark, we're talking about the trademark.
The logo.
The logo.
Yeah. So when I talk about the mark, for me, it's the logo, right? It's that branding element that goes on the back of the cow's ass, right? And so when we look at the mark has to have a couple of components to it that for me are important over a longer period of time. Right. So, for example, there's the brand name. Then there's also what's called an extractable branding unit, the EBU. So you see many little marks out there that, for example, back in the day, you saw a big swoosh and you saw the name Nike. Right. That swoosh is the EBU, the extractable branding unit. When you establish a brand and you keep on delivering that brand against how you want to deliver it over a period of time, the name becomes less important. It's that swoosh. We all now know that when you see a swoosh on something, it's Nike. When we see a bitten apple on something, we know what it's about. And so that EBU is a very important component of it. So it's not just about, let me put a pretty scripted name together or whatever font as a brand name. Can I create this little mark that goes within the total logo that over time we can pull out and use as a stamp across a variety of different venues to drive recognition of the brand? How do I make that mark recognizable and appreciated over a period of time? So the last thing we typically do is kind of get to that logo mark. Then, of course, the website and all the marketing components follow from those pieces, right? So that's why sometimes the process of brand development takes a fair amount of time, because some time needs, and you've gone through it, the time needs to be spent up front to understand the brand's purpose. Why does it exist? What's the value it's creating? How is it going to separate itself from competition? Then we can go into name, or nomenclature or naming and making sure the name is cool or makes sense. Then we can go into logo design. Then we can go into website design. Then we can go into social assets, media assets, physical assets that go along with it.
I can hear people saying, I have faces in my head of, Gary, that is too much. You don't need to do all of that. Like, I've got a great name, I've got a great logo, and we are ready to go. So what, you're not going to convince that person.
No, of course not.
That you're not going to convince them, but where have you seen founders have that aha moment that you've worked with? They're like, I get why you're paid the big bucks. I get why this is so important.
I think so. Not I think I've seen it. When I take people through, when I take people through my process, and they get to go through a lot of the work that I take them through from a standpoint of purpose development, differentiation, all that kind of stuff, the light bulb goes off, and I've actually seen people in tears, because when all of a sudden it's so easy, because now they really understand who they are, the light bulb completely goes off. And again, I actually have seen people in tears. So with the level of gratitude, it's a different world, because now you can start to see how you can focus and deliver short and long term against where you need to be on something that is going to be of value by your customer base. Too many times, I think what happens is that we use the absolutely horrific word called like. Like is one of the worst words from a marketing standpoint. It's a horrible word. I can't stand that word, because when we say we like something, we as individuals are in subset of one. We're an N of one. So what I like, what you like, what a founder likes about their brand is, who cares, right? It's actually irrelevant. It really comes down to what is going to drive customer behavior and understanding based on core values of customers, of people, and delivering. So it's not about like, it's about what do we get and how do we get people, not yourself as a founder, to love the brand. So when I see people and talk to people who like their logo and they like their brand and they're like, it's great, good share, tell it to whomever you want, but do customers love your brand? Do customers really understand who you are? Does your brand, and is your brand set up to be successful for a long period of time rather than just right out of the gate? So it's tough to tell people a lot of that. But when I take people through the process and get them to understand, and they get to understand a lot of the psychological and cognitive triggers that are involved in brand development, they truly start to appreciate it.
Psychological and cognitive triggers.
Yes.
Dive deeper into that, because I mean, there's truth to that a lot of people probably just don't even understand.
So when we think about brands, a brand has to stand for something. And I said it before, in the heart and mind of your consumer base, right? Ultimately, as we start to think of the heart and mind, you think about it from a standpoint of whether it be your prefrontal cortex, which is more of the rational thinking component of your brain, right? To your reptilian brains, to your emotional brains, and so on. And you look at all those pieces, and they all have to work together in order to understand and deliver against what you want to do for your brand. So there are, and I talk about this a lot, there are 5 fundamental human values, right? I'm not going to go into this piece right here. There are 12 fundamental human motivators. And so does the brand deliver against those values that we as a species appreciate? And does the brand deliver against those motivators that, again, we as a species are motivated by? A. B, The other component is that I think where a lot of folks fall down is there have been studies out there and so on that basically will tell you that approximately 95% of all decision-making happens as a result of your emotional or your reptilian or your instinctual centers of your brain, not your rational part of your brain, not your prefrontal cortex. It's your first reaction to something, right? Whether it be a gut reaction, there are folks who have called it different things from a standpoint of different names. I think it was Freud who called it the id and the superego. It was Plato who called it the charioteer and the unruly horse. But there's a lot of different psychologies that have gone over the years. But ultimately, your first reaction to something, your gut reaction determines whether or not you're going to appreciate or not appreciate it. So understanding how you get that first reaction in a positive way, those are psychological triggers. How do you get some or cognitive triggers in the way the brain works? Those are all play into brand development because we all make decisions very quickly on anything that we see. And so those are big parts of what we go off and what I go off in helping when I develop work with brands.
So how does a founder know if they've gone through a really good, robust branding exercise or if they haven't? Like what would they, I would say if you had the name and the logo, and that was the first thing that you did, you probably didn't go through a really good, robust branding exercise. What would some of those things be that they should ask themselves to know if they have not gone through a robust branding exercise?
I think the first thing you need to always ask yourself is within your target audience, what truly is the value you're delivering against them? So if you can immediately say within 5 words, what is the value you deliver, right? And it's not necessarily Simon Sinek's why, and I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, right? Big fan, but it goes beyond that. What's that true core value that we as a species, we appreciate that you're really tapping into and driving? Most folks don't do that process. Most folks actually don't even engage in that process at all. What you'll hear is that we'll give them the best ride. So the component is, so what? You're going to go and you're going to give them the best indoor cycling ride. So what? You're going to go, you're going to give them the best fitness training. So what? You're going to go give them the best massage. So what? You're going to go give them the best paint job. So what? So if you can quickly answer from a value standpoint, that so what, from a customer or consumer standpoint, you're starting to understand your brand. It's not about being the best at something. It's about the so what. Because being the best at something is subjective. Everybody's best is different than somebody else's best. It's that so what? What does that mean? What's the value that the consumer or the customer is going to appreciate?
So what is the so what at Cycle Bar, at massage, at painting?
So the so what for Cycle Bar was to create an engaging, energizing environment so people feel energized and engaged, right? So it's really about driving energy and so on into infusing energy. It wasn't about the rider at all. When you think about massage, it's really about to drive or to create people, and in this case, I'll talk about it from a massage height standpoint, to elevate their lives so they can achieve more. Right? If you think about why people go in for a massage, you're kind of feeling crappy. Things are holding you back. So from a massage height standpoint, if we can take you to new elevated states, you're going to be able to do more things, which, by the way, also helps others. From a painting standpoint, to be able to actually get you to fall in love with your home again. Too many times you see a lot of folks that go in and they buy a home and they first initially love it, but then over a period of time, we grow tired, right? And so we grow. And so the idea is, how do we take everything, fixing all those different pieces, including some carpentry work and so on, and have you fall in love with your home again. So that's the so what. We want people to fall in love with their home again. We want people to go off to elevate from where they are so they can actually achieve more. We want people to feel energized and create a community of energized people. That's what we talk about from the so what standpoint.
So how does a buyer, someone that's looking at buying a franchise, and they're like, oh my gosh, I listened to this podcast with Erik and Gary. Brand is really important. I want my franchisor to know how important branding is. And I want to make sure that they've kind of done that. What would be a question that a franchise buyer would ask a franchisor to kind of uncover this?
So first and foremost, I do laugh at a lot of the franchise advertising that's out there. Join the top fitness franchise in the country. Join the fastest growing healthcare business in the, so you hear all this hyperbole and it's a lot of bogus stuff. None of it tells people what the value it delivers to the consumer base is, because if it's not going to deliver a value to the customer base or consumer base, then they're not going to be able to attract users. So the first question you always have to ask goes back to the whole so what. What is the value that your brand delivers to the customer base that's going to get them to truly appreciate the brand, right? And then you have to go out there and you start talking about, okay, how do you communicate that value? How do you help me communicate that value? Because it all comes down to being able to deliver that value. How do you help me operationally deliver that value? But it all comes down to understanding what the true value to the customer is going to be. And it can't be a superlative like best, right? Do you remember and I think I've shared this with you, but do you remember the movie Elf? Mm-hmm. Right, and in the movie Elf, Will Ferrell goes into the coffee shop and he sees the sign and he says, congratulations, you did it. And the sign says world's best cup of coffee, right? Everybody claims to be best or better than everybody else. That's a meaningless phrase. Because if everybody is better or best of everybody else, that means nobody is better and best, right? So from that standpoint, understanding the true core value, understanding the true proposition of why it exists and how it impacts the customer base, and then all the pieces that deliver against that are the most important thing. I tell franchisees all the time, do not fall for the word best or better. Those are just bogus terms.
What's something practical? Because what you just said, I agree with, I like it, but it's subjective because a franchisor could kind of say anything. And if you don't have a litmus test of what good branding or best branding or whatever, I'm using some of those terms that you just did. But if you don't know what good looks like, you're going to be fooled because they're just going to share with you what they think is great. And a candidate can be like, wow, they've done a great branding exercise. So what are some things that person could ask that would immediately uncover whether they've done it or not? And by the way, I would say most franchise brands haven't gone through probably great branding exercise. No. So this isn't a reason not to buy a brand, a certain franchise. This is just to uncover if they're not great at this. So again, it's not a reason not to buy. It's just so you just are better informed. So what would some practical questions to ask that you'd be like, they clearly haven't done any branding exercise?
I think it comes down to first question is, what's the brand's purpose? What's the reason why the brand exists? And if that cannot be articulated in probably 5 words or less, then that means they haven't done that component. What are the key differentiators that our customers truly value? Okay, and if they can't articulate the key differentiators that are truly valued, because there's only a small set of those, right? If somebody starts going into every feature and benefit that their brand has, then basically they don't know. They should be able to articulate very, very quickly, probably 3 different differentiators max, very, very quickly. So the brand's purpose, key differentiator, and then what's the brand's promise? What is the promise to the consumer? If they can't truly differentiate or communicate a brand promise, that's a watch out, because all the other stuff flows from that. And so ultimately, yes, when you start to think about decision making, of course, there's economic value that needs to be created, right? So let's take away the all the financial and economic components that are going to be important. But it really comes down to, does the founder or does the president or does whomever truly understand what's the brand's purpose? What are the key differentiators? So what's the space that it owns? And what's the brand promise? Start there. And if people have struggled to articulate in a very clear, concise manner, then that's a watch out. If the three don't come together, they're very disparate, that's a watch out, right? Because the three have to come together. That means it's a focused brand. So those three elements.
Love it. How does branding and a cause fit? Is it like oil and water? Is it perfect? And where I'm going with this is a brand that's in my portfolio of brands. I'm either advisor or equity holder in some of these different brands, but it's a newer brand with about 50 locations sold, a very exciting space in food and beverage. It's an amazing brand. I can't wait for this thing to grow. But one of the things that's being developed is tying it to a cause in true giving back fashion. And they're wanting to provide counseling for kids for free and create kind of space for them to be able to have, some, whether it's at a school or whatnot, create kind of a safe space for them to go and cool down or whatever they need to do. So where does branding and cause, or where do they fit well together? And any cautions?
I think it really comes down to a couple of things. There are many brands, many companies, and it's good, don't get me wrong, but they'll go off and embrace causes based on providing donations. So you see their donations are spread across a variety of different things. That's cause giving, and that's fantastic, because a lot of those causes, I'm sure, love the fact that they're giving money and so on to it. But that's not the cross between branding and cause. The two have to actually support each other, right? So when we created Cycle Bar, one of the things that we did is we created a platform called Cycle Giving. And Cycle Giving within the Cycle Bar franchise meant that the rooms, Cycle Bar franchise owners would basically then donate the room to a cause. And then that room, whatever revenue it generated, got donated obviously back to that cause. So Cycle Giving made sense because it focused in on and it related back to the brand, because of the fact that we were able to use the bikes to be able to raise money, to be able to give back at a local level. So if you can actually link the brand together with what the brand stands for, or the target audience of the brand, and the function of what the brand goes off and does, to some kind of charitable opportunity, that's where you're going to win. Right? Trying to create that relationship between those pieces. So, for example, and this is not necessarily the case, but I'll pick on line painting. Let's say line painting went off and did and worked Habitat. That's a nice connection, right? On a local level. And I don't know if they're doing that or not. I don't think actually they're not doing that right now. It's probably a good thing for them to go off and do. They have other things that they're doing, but connecting to a Habitat to be able to get people to fall in love with their home is a natural connection between the two. If you look at one of the things that we're doing from a Massage Heights standpoint is creating our own capability of Massage Heights, where we are giving back to our communities by providing first responders, those people who elevate or care for others. We give them the opportunity for us to care for them, right? And so the synergistic relationship between what they go off and do and our ability to give back to them is a natural relationship. So if you can find natural relationships that don't seem like they're one-off, that's important, A. B, if it's something that could be sustained. Honestly, too many times I think where the biggest mistake is made on any causal component is that there's no true win for the brand. And so I don't believe in charity models. I believe in prosperity models. And a prosperity model means that you're going to win for a longer period of time and for probably greater if I also win. So if I go back to Cycle Giving or Cycle Gives, how did Cycle Bar win? Well, all those people that came in for a ride, for a free ride, they wound up becoming leads. And then those leads would turn into members. So it was a continuous stream of lead generation based on allowing for giving from a donation standpoint. It could be that, our goal is obviously to be able to create prospects and through public relations arms and so on, generate positive halo awareness. So as long as there's a win for the brand, then the brand can sustainably continue to give. And over a period of time, there's a greater degree of engagement and connectivity because of the time and so on. So prosperity modeling more than charity modeling as you start to think about your causes.
What would you say to a brand, a franchisor that realizes they have not put the time and effort and energy into the branding, and they have, let's call it 50 franchisees or 5 franchisees or 100, but they know that they are not where they have not put in the work into branding that they should have. What would you say to that founder?
So number one, it's never too late, right? At the end of the day, we need to always look at our brands as far as truly a long-term value. Number two, if you really do put the value into the brand development component of it, your story is significantly greater and you will increase your value. If your choice is to go the PE route, right, you're going to sell off, right, and get private,
which most brands do.
Most brands do. You will increase your value by having a much better story, right? By having all those pieces put together, your value will increase. So A, it's never too late. B, you increase your value. And C, you don't worry about, I think what a lot of folks may worry about is there's a fear component of change. Change is manageable, right? I tell people all the time, it's not that I want to go into a system and create revolutionary change. No, you can evolve change over a short period of time through frequency of iteration of change. And then all of a sudden people start to realize, oh, wait, we've changed significantly. I didn't even notice it. That's the way so there's methodologies, processes, or so on that can minimize risk of change. Change will increase your value, and it's never too late to change. Those are the 3 things that I basically talk about. But ultimately it comes down to, really, don't you want to provide the greatest value and understanding within for your brand to your customer base?
Where do branding and marketing intersect, and where should they stay in their lanes?
That's a heck of a question. I think from that standpoint, I think there's this massive blurring of lines because people have different definitions of each. Right. So for me, that's the reason why I don't use the term branding personally. And I call myself, I focus in on brand development, is marketing, branding, finance, operations, all have to come together. Now, when I think of marketing in particular, I'm going to take more of the AMA's approach, or the American Marketing Association's approach, which talks about the creation, delivery, and communication of value that influences behavior, right? And so those are all the programs and things that you go off and do, and people talk about 4 Ps, and there's even more than that, but you get the idea. When we talk about branding, we talk about what does the brand stand for, and how do we bring it to life in every place that we do, right? So it's when we talk about being a brand steward, it's are we making sure that the brand is being delivered, communicated, perceived in the way that we want it to do. So where it separates is marketing is about the creation of value. Branding is really more about the creation or delivery of perception. They have to link because value and perception are going to come together. They have to link because if you're going off and doing a promotion from a marketing standpoint or some delivery mechanism from a marketing standpoint, but it's going to be counter to what the brand stands for, then you wind up hurting yourself. So they should always be together, talking to each other and so on, frequent conversations. And that's why for someone like myself, having the role of being more of a brand officer than a marketing officer links the two pieces together, because I can keep branding and marketing, and so that they are focused on delivering a cohesive message through cohesive or relevant delivery mechanisms or mediums to drive both aspects of it, value and perception.
When you have you've gone through proper brand development exercises and you have a strong brand, how much of a guardrail is that when you're doing different marketing things and you have different opportunities? How much does it just allow you to quickly say yes to things, or maybe more important, quickly to say no to other things?
So I think that's a fantastic point. You know, I jokingly tell folks, once you create your brand pyramid, if you will, your brand proposition and all the elements that go in it, we no longer laminate things because we're a digital environment. But if you can digitally laminate something, right, and then every single time you look at any kind of marketing proposition, any kind of marketing operations proposition or product proposition or so on, and you have to be able to look at your digitally laminated brand pyramid, if you will, and say to yourself, does this deliver against the purpose? Does this deliver or support our product differentiators? Does this deliver against our brand promise and against this target audience? And if the answer is, kinda, sorta, you know, if I create all these mental bridges and I start leaping around, I can get there, then don't do it. You're wasting your time. You're going to do a much better job by staying relatively laser focused. I'll tell people a lot of times that I love working with creative people. And I'm not creative at all. Strategically, I'm highly creative, but from a directive standpoint, no. If we put people in a tiny box, right, they're going to be incredibly creative on delivering against that tiny box. If we get them to focus, the absolute brilliance on focus is amazing. If we open it up and you could do a whole bunch of different things, well, people start creating just things that are nice, but not absolutely brilliant because there is no focus. That digital lamination, if you will, helps to create focus, which helps to create brilliance within the space that you want to create.
So when someone goes through a brand development exercise, is mission and core values part of that, or does that come later?
That'll come post the purpose and the purpose, the differentiation, the promise, and so on. That's going to be part of that, because if your vision and mission and core values and brand positioning have to feed together to be able to deliver against the core essence of the brand. But first you have to understand the core essence of the brand. And that can actually happen simultaneously to logo development and website development and so on. All those pieces can happen at the same time. That's a lot of stuff to happen at the same time, but it's very doable.
Well, I think you're coming into the franchisor mastermind to teach some of this stuff to some of our franchisors in that mastermind. I'm excited about that. But if someone was to hire somebody like you, how long does this exercise take to go through?
There's multiple components to this. So the simple answer is traditionally in about a couple of weeks, we can go from A to Z, depending on the intensity of time, right? If this is going to be a 1 time a week scenario, that takes longer. If it's going to be, we're going to do this for 4 solid days of meeting together, and then 4 solid, then days of me going off and pulling this together, and then more days of coming back and chatting and so on, then it takes 2 to 3 weeks max. Now, that's not the important component. The important component is, and I've seen this, and it's kind of a little disheartening, to be honest, where we go off and do this intensive exercise, and all of a sudden you have, light bulbs going off and all this, and we provide all the documentation, and there's all the stuff that goes along. And then I walk away. So there's a choice to either, you bring me in, and I can go part-time, few hours, just to monitor to make sure the stuff happens, or I leave, and it's up to you to deliver against this as a franchisor, but they stop doing that. And so all of a sudden I start to see the brand go off in a direction that maybe they were going off in, or it's an unfocused thing because they didn't stay core to what was created. So it's only a few weeks, a couple of weeks, if you will, to 3 weeks to go off and to create it. The creation of all the other components, it all depends on whether or not they're, that you have in-house web, or we're going with an outside agency for a web design, whether or not there's all those pieces that need to be created. But then there's how do we start to infuse it across all the different touch points post the creation of the brand development exercise?
Okay, with that, who in the organization typically takes that role? Because that's implementation. That's like, you learned all of this stuff. It's created for you, but you have to go implement that. Who is that person in a typical organization with a franchise that has, 10 to 50 employees?
So I look at it this way. I think there are several folks, but the key person here is going to be the brand president. Every single time one of the people come to them, or a CEO, and comes to them and say, I have this idea. This digitally laminated piece needs to come out, and they need to look at it and say, did you see this sheet here? Tell me how it fits into the brand, right? Don't tell me why you think it's a great idea. Tell me how it fits into the brand. So the CEO, or if you have a chief brand officer, or if you have a chief marketing officer who really goes beyond marketing, who understands all the other pieces, they need to be the brand steward. Somebody needs to be that steward of the brand that's going to hold everybody accountable for every idea and every execution to deliver against the fundamentals of what the brand needs to deliver against.
How often is that the COO?
It can be. The COOs come in different abilities, shapes, sizes, expertises, and so on, right? And I think that there's a lot of COOs out there that can do it. I don't think it's a function of whether or not they have a tremendous marketing background, but if they literally can be able to answer the question, or have people answer the question to them, and saying, how does this fundamentally deliver against the brand promise, the brand purpose? I think anybody in the organization can do it. From that standpoint, typically I'd stay away from CFOs, but that's a whole separate story.
Yes.
And I definitely
this
stay
has
away
been
from
really good. I can't
stay
wait
away
to
from
have
salespeople too, because they just want to sell anything. It doesn't really matter.
I know. Well, I can't wait to have you, teach the mastermind part of this, and probably do some hot seats within there too, to point out some things that they might be doing wrong. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Well, man, I appreciate your friendship over the years. I appreciate how you've helped me personally. And I know just talking to other franchisors out there that you've had an impact in their brands. And so I know you're doing amazing things, and I appreciate that. Any last bits of wisdom or comments or websites or things that you would like to share with the audience?
If people want to learn more about me, obviously, you can go to LinkedIn and Gary DeJesus, or you can go to gdjbrands.com. That's my website. What I would tell you is that it's, again, really important to have a brand that is, well, let me step back. Spending many years at Procter & Gamble, we didn't develop a brand for 10 years, right? For us to believe that brand was going to be, we developed brands that were going to last 100 years, right? So built to last and developing brands that really have core fundamentals that are A, of value to the customer, but B, can morph or are flexible enough to morph based on trends and so on, are critical. So as you look at your brand, is your brand fundamentally sound versus deliver against value? And is it flexible enough that if something changes, it can morph with the change? And so that's the only thing. But again, go to gdjbrands.com, or if you want to just connect with me, Gary at gdjbrands.com.
Now, you picked the worst stinking letters for a website. Like, those are the ones you always have to clarify.
Yes.
But I know why you did it.
Gary DeJesus. Okay.
I know. GDB.
GDJ.
I know what I'm saying. It's just one of those, like but it's Gary DeJesus. You get it. It's like me for EVH. People like, is
exactly right.
Oh man. Well, man, thanks again. I'm super excited to have you come into my world and share with the franchisors. And I just appreciate all that you've done in the franchising community.
Oh, thank you. And the last thing I just want to quickly leave is, for franchisors, the whole NFT space can be a very interesting new space if franchisors want to start to think about moving forward with potential metaverse and Web3 activity. And there's ways of doing that in a smart way. So I'm going to leave people with that who are more futuristic in their thinking.
Well, that was what was going through my mind when you said, if you could digitally laminate this, I was thinking NFT, Gary.
Exactly. And that's exactly right. There's wonderful things out there that can actually be done. So yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Franchise Secrets Podcast. Whether you're watching or listening, please make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and to whatever channel you're listening on. If you want my help with anything from buying a franchise to franchising your business, please visit franchisesecrets.com.